Let's get some analysis on American-Sino relations by speaking to Victor Teo. He's in Singapore and is a research fellow at the University of Cambridge. Victor Teo, always good to speak with you, sir. So what's your sense from the readouts that we've got from the call from the White House and from Chinese state media? It seems that things are a little calmer than they were at that very strange meeting that the foreign ministers had in Alaska earlier this year.
Oh, that meeting was for show. But the phone call is today, or actually yesterday, depending where you are. It's actually a positive step forward for China-US relations. But I wonder whether it is enough and whether it is really sustainable in the long run. We cannot assume that just because both presidents spoke to each other on the phone, that things are going to get better. And I say that because recent moves by China have suggesting that the Chinese are actually ready to use a timeout with the United States to achieve other goals domestically. For instance, they are trying to address the ill effects of capitalism, reduce inequality, and work on their policies towards reunification vis-a-vis Hong Kong and Taiwan. And they're doing other things like to accelerate their military modernization. So yes, it might be looking good for today, but in the long run, we still have to be very cautious.
Just lay out for us some of those elements where you think China is becoming more strident. I'm very fascinated with this idea of taking on capitalism. Of course, we remember what happened with China in the 80s and 90s, surging ahead, but now there have been a number of policies brought in on big companies in China. Victor, just take us through some of the steps that have been put in place and the philosophy behind what the Chinese state is trying to do right now.
Well, I think one of the things the Chinese president is trying to address is the question of inequality, as well as the question of how big capital should behave in China, because after all, China is a professed communist country. So having capitalists in the ranks amongst the Communist Party members is kind of a abnormally, if you like, over the past I would say 3 decades since they've done it. So many people are suggesting that this is the time that the Chinese president is actually trying to use this opportunity to address how he envisages that how big capital and big tech companies should behave in China vis-a-vis the ordinary folks. So this is one of the things they're doing. A second thing is that they are also trying to ensure that their own companies grow with indigenous developments in mind. So a lot of these companies are actually going out to the United States to raise capital and list on NASDAQ and the stock exchange in the US or, for example, in Singapore. One of the things that the Chinese leadership wants is actually for these companies to take into account seriously Chinese Communist Party as well as state goals in terms of how it wants, if you like, the messaging done, in terms of how it feels that big companies should behave towards Chinese consumers. So I think there's a lot to unpack here, and it's still pretty much a work in progress. But at least I think the broad direction has been set for these companies.
Yeah, absolutely right. Tackling inequality, I think you've nailed it there. It's a fascinating moment in the development, the growth of China. Now, you've been a bit pessimistic, Victor, about the US-China relations, and I wonder, an area of common ground perhaps is the climate crisis, both nations trying to reduce their carbon footprint?
Yes, because I think this is one of the areas that, it's like a no-brainer. If you can't get agreement on trade or North Korea, everybody wants to have a good environment. So this is one of the common items that politicians tend to go for when there is a lot of difficulty. Having said that, it's a real concern for everybody now because of the serious impact of global warming and such. But I think Joe Biden made the phone call to China because of 3 issues. First of all, he feels that probably that China is preparing for a conflict and he doesn't want this to happen. I mean, a lot of things that the Trump administration has done has actually damaged the basic fabric of US-China relations. So Joe Biden, even though he has inherited the mantle of Trump's China policy, he doesn't actually want the United States to go into a conflict with China. Secondly, I think China is not actually taking the transactional approach that Biden has inherited very well. So visits by, for example, like you mentioned just now, the Blinken-Yang Jiechi meeting in Alaska, the Sherman visit in July and the Kerry meeting last week is not moving China-US relations forward. I think what the China wants is to take a holistic approach. So what I'm saying here is that the Chinese is feeling that they need to be taken seriously by the Biden administration. I think the call by Joe Biden is trying to achieve that. And I think the third important aspect is that the United States is feeling the economic, if you like, the burden of Trump's policies. So I think Biden is trying to reach out to the Chinese to see if they can actually make some sort of movement or some sort of progress on the trade talks. So eventually, I think they will have to solve this. But with that, having said that in mind, the Chinese and the Biden administration do actually have one big common goal that is unstated, and that is to prevent Donald Trump and the Republicans from gaining power come the midterm elections in 2022 and the presidential elections afterwards.
Something they can agree on. They don't want the instability that may cause. And let's just finish up then, Victor, with another point of contention that's just come up in the past couple of weeks. Both nations' role in the future of Afghanistan. Obviously, the US are withholding some funds at the moment. They're held in the Federal Reserve. China has promised some aid money. How is that going to play out between the two nations going forward, do you think?
I think both countries have fundamentally different approach. But the Chinese are angry at the way the Americans have left. But it's something that it's only in the American interest to do so. So, having said that, because the Americans have left, the Chinese as well as the Russians will have to contend with the new government in Afghanistan, and that is actually a problem. But given the long-standing Chinese policy of non-intervention in the affairs of others, it's likely that the Chinese would treat the Taliban government, if they do come to power and able to hold power, as like any other government they would treat. After all, China has good relations with Pakistan. China has good relations with Iran. So I think together with Iran and Pakistan, they can actually maybe work with the Taliban government.
Yeah,
per se.
We'll see if that happens. Always good to speak with you, Victor Teo from the University of Cambridge. Appreciate the analysis. Thanks for being with us.